and welcome to the Texas Triangle Podcast. Who should be listening to this podcast? Let me tell you, anyone that is investing money in real estate or businesses in Texas, especially people that are considering a move to Texas, even if it is just your money. Texas is a booming state, adding 1,300 people per day and the ninth largest economy in the world. Last decade alone, Texas added 4 million to its population, more than any other state. If you take I-35 from DFW to San Antonio, all the counties along I-35, all the counties touching I-35 and east of it make up 89.4% of the Texas population. All that growth has created challenges too. So here at the Texas Triangle, we talk specifically about the major metros which create the triangle: DFW, Austin, San Antonio, and Houston, and then all of the small towns in between. We're providing insight for practitioners in commercial real estate, investors, Texas business, and businesses considering a move to Texas. I'm going to pass it over to Diane to introduce our awesome guest today.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here and listening in. I'm super excited. I know DeLea is as well. And today our special guest is Todd Votteler. He's Ph.D. and is president of Collective Water Resolutions LLC, editor-in-chief of the Texas Water Journal and Texas Plus Water, and hosts the Talk Plus Water podcast, which is amazing. If you guys can go listen to that, you can find him on the, changing over to our little slide here. You can listen to him on Spotify or SoundCloud or major other platforms. It's called Talk Plus Water Podcast. He is a fellow of podcast. Yes.
Apple Podcast. That's where I listened this week.
Oh, you are on Apple. Okay, great. So he is a fellow of the Meadows Center for Water and the Environment at Texas State University, a mentor at the Austin Technology Incubator at the University of Texas at Austin, an executive committee member for the Permanent Forum of Binational Waters. So previously, Mr. Votteler here was executive manager of science, intergovernmental relations, and policies at the Guadalupe Blanco River Authority, chairman of the Guadalupe Basin Coalition, research scientist in Washington, D.C., for the Battelle and the Pacific Northwest National Laboratories. He was the executive director of the Guadalupe Blanco River Trust and chairman of the Texas Land Trust Council. Wow. I don't even know where to begin on that one. That's a lot of stuff going on. It's fantastic. He also, just a little background on some of his mitigations that he's worked on in the past. In 1994, Mr. Votteler worked for the court monitor during Sierra Club versus Babbitt. And in 1996, he was appointed federal special master during Sierra Club versus San Antonio. In 2016, he negotiated a resolution to the conflict over the surface water's use and potential impacts to the endangered whooping cranes. Wow. He is quite the well-rounded man. Thank you so much, Todd, for being here. We appreciate you. And just to get us started, and let us know kind of how you got your career started in the water world, and give us a little background on some things that interest you in continuing and pursuing your water career.
Well, sure. But first, let me just say thanks for having me on today. I've really been looking forward to this. And, I love your program here. I think it's great. And it's an honor to be part of it.
Thank you. Absolutely.
So how I got started, I grew up in Dallas, and my dad would take me hunting and fishing while we were growing up. And I just developed a love of the outdoors. And then when I went to college, I was one of these people who had a hard time figuring out what they wanted to major in. And eventually I decided, I really like working with natural resource issues. And so I'm going to do that. And eventually, when I came back to Texas from Tennessee, where I went to school at Swanee, I decided, hey, water seems to be the key to the future of Texas, and kind of gotten my feet wet, working for somebody who had been involved working for courts trying to resolve various disputes over water across the country. And I just thought, wow, these water disputes, they're really, really fascinating. When you look at all the different groups and interests that are associated with them, and how it all plays out, because they're all unique and they're all very complex. And just fascinated with that. And so, it's evolved into a career, which is, I'm now kind of in a second part of my career where I have, kind of gone out on my own. I'm no longer working for a government organization or a consulting firm or another organization like that. I have my own little firm, and there's so much work to do with research on water markets and working with stakeholders involved with, issues over groundwater, that I'm just having a great time. So.
That's fantastic. I love that. I love the story of how you just going fishing with your dad and just the history. And I love water. This is probably one of my extremely favorite topics to talk about, because obviously we drink it, we use it, we need it. It's so important. Obviously, this conversation we're having today is really around Texas and a lot of the changes, as the growth that we've seen. And then on top of it, we're currently in our 88th legislative session right now. And you've got a great amount of knowledge on that. And I just love to just start kind of getting into the meat and bones of it, because this legislation right now has got a lot of going on in the water sector. Is that right?
You are absolutely right about that. So this is a big water session, is what folks in the water community would say. The last big one was 2013, so we're really overdue. And what's going on right now is, because there was a significant budget surplus, the legislature is looking at the opportunity to create a new funding source for water. And I'm talking about new water projects, but also addressing our aging water infrastructure, which is a real challenge for a state like Texas, which has got a lot of people and a lot of systems, 7,100 systems, water, individual little utilities, most of them. But they all have, significant needs to upgrade, because many of them are very old, and we've got lead pipes removed. And so the legislature is looking at creating a new dedicated fund, which would be called the Water for Texas Fund. And if you want to take a look at it, you can go online and look up the Texas legislature and the 88th session and put in Senate Bill 28. That is one of the big vehicles. Yep, Senate Bill 28. You also should look at Senate Joint Resolution 75 and House Joint Resolution 169. So those are the three: Senate Bill 28, House Joint Resolution 75, and House Joint Resolution 69. They would create this new dedicated fund, which might have somewhere between $1 billion and $3 billion in it, that would be managed by the Texas Water Development Board. So going back a little to the beginning of what I'm talking about, of course, we had President Biden signing the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act, which is also known as the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. And so that is that's really once in generational, amount of money for water infrastructure all over the country. And for Texas, we're going to get about $3.5 billion from the federal government for water infrastructure. And the state right now in the legislature, as I mentioned, is trying to create additional funds that could be combined. so that we can really make some progress. Not only do we have aging infrastructure that needs to be addressed, the EPA says $61 billion over the next 20 years for Texas just to keep things going well with our infrastructure, upgrading and maintaining it. But we need another 80 billion to put in place all the water projects to supply the water that's going to be needed in Texas by 2050 or 2070, sorry, 2070. When we come out with a water plan every 5 years, it's got a 50-year timeline for implementation. And so that's huge amounts of money that are needed for this state to make sure that all these new residents that you mentioned and the businesses, right, that are associated with them have water, and that there's also water left over for the environment.
Wow. Yeah, it's a lot. Now, being said on this, with this amount of fund being provided to Texas, have you heard or got any inclination on any kind of other global water alliance for technology, and where those funds are going to come and look and structure wise as to what are they going to put those dollars towards? You know, do these bills have that laid out pretty well?
For the federal money, yes.
Okay.
So the federal government in general sends that money to the Texas Water Development Board, which is of the state agencies. That's the planning agency and the really kind of the financing agency too. Okay. They do some other things as well, but those are, you know, two of the primary functions. And so that money comes from the federal government, goes to the Texas Water Development Board, and then the various water entities across the state apply to the board to get money for their individual projects, which include, you know, replacing and upgrading water infrastructure, not only for water treatment, you know, water that we're drinking, but also for wastewater treatment, you know, water that we put back in a river, or as we see more and more in the future, we take that water from the wastewater treatment plant, clean it up even more, and put it back directly into the water supply.
Right.
You know, that's the future for sure.
Right. No, that's great. Kind of going back a little bit regarding the infrastructure, and one of the podcasts that I listened to, which was fantastic, one of your guests had talked about aquifers are the infrastructure, and that was a really interesting aspect because we really don't look at a lot of what the water underneath, and people are not pervious to Texas and its own little world here on how and where and what those aquifers actually mean and can do for us. Can you elaborate on, you know, what that could look like if we were to implement a plan for the longevity of these projects using the aquifer as infrastructure?
Sure. So, you know, think about it this way. You know, we're getting water from, you know, two main sources, and we've got surface water, right, coming from our rivers and lakes, and then we've got groundwater coming from aquifers. And those sources of water actually are interconnected, even though in Texas, you know, we don't really recognize that very well, the way our laws are set out. But those aquifers they're water supply sources, right? You know, they're natural ones. And so their natural infrastructure in that regard is the same for rivers as well. And, you know, many significant projects, San Antonio is one. Another national example is New York. San Antonio has gone out and they've spent a lot of money to preserve the areas above the aquifer, Edwards Aquifer, and over the aquifer to protect that water supply. New York has gone to upstate New York where they have their water supply reservoirs, and they preserved immense amount of land that is, you know, in the area that contributes to those reservoirs. They're doing that to protect their future water supply. And so, so those are some of the kinds of things that have been done. But for Texas, one of the big challenges is that, you know, most of our aquifers don't really have strict limits on how much water can be taken out every year under various circumstances. You know, some do, like the Edwards Aquifer, but most don't. And so, you know, there's this issue of, you know, how long will we be able to take groundwater from those sources over time? is the state eventually going to say, look, we've got to make sure that our use of that supply is sustainable over the long term, or are we going to kind of continue down the road of overtaxing some of those aquifers? And eventually you get in a situation where, well, there's not enough for everybody, or the water quality degrades because too much has been taken out. And so that's a big challenge going forward for the state. What will we do collectively? Are we going to make a commitment to saying, look, there've got to be certain limits on some of these aquifers, and then we'll figure out how to manage what we have available based on that. And
Right.
So I went through that whole process with the Edwards Aquifer. That's why it's one of the few examples of that system where you have a strict limit, and it can be contentious, right? I mean,
Yes.
people don't like being told how much water they could use,
Yeah.
and
But
that's a tough thing to do.
We still have it, and it's operable, and you can see. So to that point, Todd, with the Edward Aquifer in the planning system, how long is a typical water management plan versus what some that who are not doing it? Is there a 15, a 20, a 30 year, or should there be a longer process here to manage it appropriately versus just saying, well, we hit, this is concerning now, it's kind of retroactive, now we have to pick up the pieces and figure out something? What does a typical plan look like?
So it's a very complicated question. So, thanks for asking that. Now you put me on the spot, but it's a good question. I mean, I think the average person who wants to know about water, they're going to say, what's the plan, right?
Yeah.
We must have a plan in place. So in Texas, we have a water planning process where states divide up into 16 areas. In each one of those areas, you have stakeholders that represent big business, small business, agriculture, the environment, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, all these various interest groups. And they get together and they come up with a plan every 5 years. And those plans get cobbled together into the state water plan. So we update that plan every 5 years going forward. And the plan has a 50-year outlook. And one of the reasons why we do that is the technology is changing rapidly. And so we, just thinking about when I first got involved in the 80s, late 80s, there was really two things that people did. You built a reservoir in Texas. Maybe you could divert from a river if there was enough water without having a reservoir, or you drilled a groundwater well. We have so many more in a freshwater aquifer. Now we have so many more choices of what we can do. We can, we can drill a well in a aquifer that is got a lot of salt in it. It's briny water, and we can desalinate it and drink that. We can find depleted aquifers and take floodwaters and water that we don't need in a certain year, and we can store it in that depleted aquifer and pull it out when we need it. There are all sorts of new technologies. I already mentioned, how we can treat wastewater directly and, put it right back into, people's taps. And so, the planning process allows for, the incorporation of that new technology as we're coming up with it, so that you don't have kind of a plan that you're implementing over 50 years, which is kind of stuck in the past in terms
Right.
of, how you do it. But to answer the other part of your question, some groundwater districts and surface water districts, have comprehensive plans about how they're managing their water. Others don't. And so that's a big challenge for us. I mentioned that there are 7,100 utilities in Texas. Most of those are small, but they also include big utilities like City of Houston, right? And so a relatively smaller number of very large utilities serve most of the population of Texas. And with groundwater, we have 100 groundwater districts. Most of them were created on the basis of a county, of the county line, right? It's a single county district. Well, if you're thinking about the environment, aquifers don't really comply with county lines. They're going across multiple counties, and so that makes it a lot more difficult, right? And so we have our challenges ahead of us, and one, I think, is for the folks who are really interested in real estate is how do we get all these entities to work together?
Right.
One way to do that is through regionalization. If the state really could encourage, hey, we need you guys to come together as a region and then collectively apply for all these funds from the federal government and from the state government to implement your projects, so that we're making sure that fewer people are left out of that. Because if you just think, if you are I'm not picking on Houston here, but you're the city of Houston, they've got a big staff, right? And so they have experience putting grants together and applying for money from the state or the federal government. A small mom and pop utility, they're not typically going to have that experience or the time, right? They might have just a couple of people, or one person in some cases managing their system, and they're keeping it running, right? They're responding to all these, issues with leaks and other issues, and they don't have experience typically writing grants or have the time to go through that process. So if we could encourage all these entities to work together, some incentives there and some disincentives, the state would benefit as a whole. And I'm hoping that that's the direction we're going to go in. And I'm doing some research that hopefully will encourage that in the long term.
I love that. It's great. We'll have to pick your brain on as you go through that. I would love to research some more on that. As we do develop outside, that's something I didn't even know was an option to look at. And that's how, we're naive in the sense of what to do and how to work this process. But I love, to your point, the collective in a regional aspect. I mean, I have a project that we're looking on outside of kind of like Marble Falls area here. And we were just, introduced to how much money we would be allowed through from the county for this PID, water utilities and all of this, 63. But of course, as a project developer and as the longevity of it, I don't know. Honestly, there's a misconnection. They say, oh, here's X amount of dollars, and then now what? Do we take it? What's the plan look like? So it's very fresh in my mind when you talk about the getting organized and having a plan and collective thought process with your regional and the people involved at the state and the national level for assistance in these, and what can we do to be on the same page. I thought it was interesting too. You had brought up a great point at some regarding the overall agricultural accounts for 55% of the Texas annual water usage, where the municipality uses accounts for 30%.
Right.
That's crazy. I mean, like you said, with the 7,100 utility districts and their mom and pop, and where does that look like? So
think about that a little bit, because that's very important to understand this. In Texas, about, like you said, 55 to 60% of the overall water use goes to agriculture, 30% municipal use. And look at California, 80%, fully 80% goes to agriculture. And the remaining 20% is for everything else.
Wow.
And so in Texas, agriculture is a key industry and a key part of our culture, but at the same time, it's 3% of the GDP. In California, it's the same thing. The Central Valley, feeds the nation, but still, it's a small amount of their GDP. And so does that mean that agriculture, should not be a priority? No. But what it means is we need to figure out a way to encourage, higher valued uses of water for agriculture. Part of our historic system has locked a lot of water use into very low agricultural, value crops like alfalfa and things like that. And so, we don't spend a whole lot of time thinking about, hey, should we grow this crop en masse in this part of the state or in this region of the country, knowing that it's very dry and the maybe 50 inches of water it needs over the year has got to come out of a river or a lake or an aquifer because you're not getting it out of the sky. That's what's in a nutshell. That's what's going on in the Colorado River out west right now. Is the climate's changing. There's less snowpack over time. The amount of water in Lake Powell and Lake Mead is dropping. And, historically, most of that water went to supply water for agriculture. And so it's a huge problem. And, they have the same set of challenges out there that we have here. The difference is that we haven't had the kind of drought they've had the last several years. We are in a drought now, and, we're definitely feeling here in Central Texas for sure. But they're in a historic drought, long-term drought. And what I always wonder is, are people here watching that and thinking, this is the kind of situation we could be in if we don't take care of our business now? And so that's why I'm really happy to see the legislature proactively, creating this fund. Hopefully gets through the process and has got the $3 billion instead of the $1 billion. And that's a good indication that yes, Texas continues to look at its issues with regard to water and respond. And so that gives me a lot of hope. But right now we're playing catch up. And if we have another long-term drought like the one we had in the 50s, which was a 7-year drought, we're going to see areas of the state run out of water. So you don't have droughts like that very often, but there's always one around the corner. And I, just kind of going off on a tangent here. I did a tree ring study looking at bald cypress trees in South and Central Texas a decade or so ago, where the University of Arkansas Tree Reading Lab and myself and a graduate student went around and sampled, I'm trying to remember, it's about 300 trees, bald cypress trees, and collected 800 samples. And we looked at those tree ring chronologies, and we can see every year what the situation was with water back to 1500. And I can tell you, the drought that we had in the 1950s in Texas, we've had some that were a lot more severe and lasted a lot longer in the past. And so you never know when one of those droughts is upon you. This drought right now could be the beginning of a drought like that. There's no way to know. As a water manager, think about that. You don't know when the drought's going to end. And so you've got to balance, inconveniencing people with saying, hey, you can't water your lawn or do something like that, with the idea that if this drought goes on so many years, we won't have water for anything. And so that's why I'm hoping that the folks who are watching this and who are involved with real estate will really think very hard about the advantages of natural landscapes using drought tolerant plants in Texas. It's, we got two big, massive uses of water, which are problematic in terms of how they're being done. Agricultural water use for very low value crops, which require a lot of irrigation, and landscape watering, right? Lawns and other features, which, that water use is when it's in July and August, September. It's the worst time, right? To be taxing aquifers and reservoirs for massive water use. But that water use is the third largest water use in the state. Think about that. I mean, it's a huge amount of water. And it's also water that is drinking water quality. I mean, it's water that couple billion people on Earth would love to have that. And we're taking out in our lawns, and, you got to think about that a little bit. And so, hey, as much as we can reduce that and take advantage of, the natural drought tolerant plants that are native to our state, it does everybody a big favor and saves the state a lot of money over the long term.
No, that is great. It's interesting that you say that about, what people can do and on the real estate end, just the little bit impact. I loved all of those things. And, I don't even thinking about, on the residential side, I can see that changeover where some of these developers and some of that, as far as on the commercial side, it really hasn't because, but I think that's, to your point, where we really need to get in there and start advocating for, hey, can we actually do some more native landscaping that makes sense instead of seeing all these massive, commercial parks, residential, that you see the irrigation system going off and you're
Right.
like, oh my gosh, put that water
Yeah.
back down. You're like, stop that.
Right.
But
Well,
it is. I did start seeing some of these communities, especially this last year, which I was kind of surprised at, but they used to have big water features outside of their, communities, and they stopped doing that. And I thought, well, there's a good step forward now that it's just sitting there. And I'm like, now you need to make it look, but it's a hole and there's, I'm like,
right.
well, hopefully, but to your point, I think that is something that we need to stop looking at as a beauty mark and need to look at it more so as, the longevity of, is it necessary to utilize a big glorious fountain out in front of these communities?
Yeah.
Instead.
Let me just respond to that because I that's a great observation. So, this is what I think. I look at a yard that's got xeriscaping, it's in, drought tolerant, native vegetation, has rocks and other things. And, some people who I know have said, well, no one's going to want to buy that. And I'm like, are you kidding me? I mean, if you're coming from California or some other state that struggles with drought regularly. I mean, you know that saves you money. Your water bill will be automatically less when you see that, and it looks great and it requires less maintenance. I'm like, all that's good. And so, but when you're talking about large scale use for landscaping by commercial users, one of the things I'm working on right now, I've been working on for a year, for a think tank called Texas 2036, is the use of more water markets in Texas. Because the key to changing behavior really is the price signal from our water use. And, everybody will say, oh, water's so precious and so valuable and blah, blah, blah. And then, they're wasting it, right? They're putting or watering too much on their lawns, or they're just getting bottled water instead of drinking water out of the tap, which is just as good and 5,000 times less. Yeah. And so water markets done effectively can really help us change our behavior towards water and to use less of it and stretch it so much farther. And when you do that, you're building fewer water projects. Your tax dollars are, they're going to something else. Probably I was going to say they're staying in your pocket. Now they're going to something else. We have a lot of things to address, right?
Yeah, that's a whole other.
That's
podcast.
Right. Yeah. So those are all positives, and I think what we're going to see in the future, that water markets can really help us get there, and do so in a way that has the individual in control, right? Which is a big deal in Texas. We're a state that, really talks about, well, we don't like too much government, but then the legislature created 100 groundwater districts. I have to ask them about that. That's
right.
Contradiction, but and all these utilities, right? All these,
they just like to say it, but somebody's holding somebody's hand.
Right. But at the same time, in a water market, the decisions are really put back into the user's hands in a critical way. And the results, what I come out with my study here this summer, I think will surprise people about how effective they can be, and how they can also be designed to make sure that, we're not pricing people out of water that they need for their just, human health and safety, cooking, all that. There's ways to make sure that, everybody has got, the minimal amount of water that they need for a very inexpensive price, and that people who are using a lot more will pay more, right?
Right. Yep.
So
DeLea, do you have any comments? I've been just right in it. So, I think you're on mute, honey.
I know. I've left y'all on mute. I've just been hemming and hawing over here. Okay, but I have a million questions, but I won't ask them all, Todd, because
ask as many as you want.
Oh, okay. I will start with one that I really care about, because we hear this term, but I don't think most people even really know what it means. So you say run out of water. Let's say I'm in a water district and I'm going to put in an industrial project and I find out there's no water. What does a developer do? Do they go buy the water from another water district and pipe it in? Or am I just out of luck? How does that happen in Texas?
Well, I guess I'd like to think that no one would build a facility without having the water secured. Here's a good example. So we're going to be building a lot of big chip plants in Austin. We already have chip plants. We're going to build a lot more, which is a great thing. But they require a lot of water. Now, they used to require tremendous amounts of water. The newer facilities are better at recycling what they use, but still it's going to be a significant increase in water demand. And so that supply is going to have to be available. And so there are efforts right now to figure out where that water is going to come from to supply those plants. And that'll be successful. But, typically somebody who's doing something like that, they'll have to go to the state and usually have to get a consultant, somebody who knows, who might have water and who might be able to help them get it, and figure out, hey, does the state need to develop additional supplies here? Are there supplies available in this aquifer or this reservoir near where we want to build? Do the cities that we're going to build our facilities at already have additional supplies which are available for industrial use? They've got to do their due diligence, right, to figure that out, where that water supply is going to come from. And so, that has to be a major consideration in, any, big future investment, like a chip plant or something else. And what you've seen over the last few decades, and this is really giving a little water 101 history. If you go back to the, 1900 or so, right? That period, we started building surface water reservoirs, and the big drought comes along in the 50s, and we go on a reservoir building, boom. And at the same time in the 50s, the technology to drill groundwater wells became cheap enough that people start tapping aquifers. And so the new water supplies, especially surface water supplies, reservoirs, kind of stopped being developed in the late 80s. And so we had this gap from that part of our water supply equation where we didn't build another new one until the last year ago. Bodark Reservoir was finished in North Texas. That's the first major reservoir project in about 30 years. Wow. And another one is underway now, also in North Texas, Lake Ralph Hall. And so during that gap, people started using more and more groundwater. They're like, the reservoirs are fully allocated for the most part. And so we got to get water from someplace. Well, we can tap these aquifers. So now we're getting to the point where, some of them are overtapped, and some of them you can see that they're going to get there pretty quickly. And so that 30-year gap, has cost us. And now we're playing catch up. The good news is that new technologies have come around where building a surface water reservoir is many times not the best answer. There are other things you can do that have fewer conflicts associated with them and are faster to put in place and less expensive. And so, we're able to take advantage of that now, but it just takes the will to do it, right, and the money. we're blessed in Texas. There's a very large water community that is, very well educated and ready to help get things done, of which I am a small time member. They're giants out there. Let me tell you, these smart people who are ready and, happy to help the state get to where it needs to go. And, this water fund, the Water for Texas Fund, which hopefully is going to be created by the 88th legislature, is a big key in meeting those future needs.
That is fantastic. Okay, I'm going to give you my most important question. So, over the last couple of weeks, whenever Diane told me you were our guest, I have been listening to your podcast on Apple Podcast and enjoying it so very much, but it would take me a long time to get through all of your episodes. If you could recommend 3 episodes that are best for Texans or people coming to Texas to go listen to either understand water, how it's all regulated, etc., or the issues that we really need to pay attention to, your top 3.
Boy, you stumped me. You stumped me.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I thought of it this morning because I was listening to one about the 88th legislature.
Well, the one where we had cocktails. Yeah. We meet a happy hour to do those legislative ones. It's funny, I got somebody who's an attorney and a chemical engineer wrote me a note, said, I love your podcast, but you need to be more professional. And you're going to a bar and you're having happy hour, you're talking about water. I'm like, hey, you're talking about the legislature. You got to have something, to help do
you
that.
Need to get some help when you're talking.
Well, another one I was listening to yesterday. I think you're sitting on the deck at Hula Hut, and you mentioned like we're talking about water issues, but look at all this water, and I'm like, that's exactly Central Texans. We're like, there's water everywhere.
Right. That was a podcast where I was talking to Greg Ellis, who's one of the state's top experts on groundwater law. He's an attorney, and kind of looking at what are the challenges in terms of creating new water markets and figuring out how to manage groundwater when, we have a system where, and let me just get in the weeds a little bit here with water. So in Texas, like most Western states, surface water is owned by the citizens of the state. It's yours and mine. And the state will issue a permit to somebody so that they can use it. They have a water right. It's a property right, but it's not the same as actually owning the water. The water still is owned by the citizens of Texas, but they've got what's called a usufructuary right, a property right that allows you to use something that it's owned by somebody else. Groundwater is totally different, and this is one of the things that complicates matters. In most Western states, groundwater is the same as surface water. It's owned by the state. In Texas, groundwater is owned by the landowner. It's yours, right? It's underneath your property, it's yours. And so trying to mesh those systems is complicated, and especially when, a groundwater district is telling the people in its district, hey, we have to limit pumping out of this aquifer to a certain amount, or we won't have much of an aquifer left eventually. Well, there are some landowners who say, you're taking my private property rights. I should be able to use what I want. Well, the question is, what's reasonable, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, there is a reasonable way to make sure that people can get what they need, that, in my opinion, doesn't really impede their private property rights, but make sure that the whole system is viable in the future. Because your property right is not worth anything if the aquifer is depleted. Right. It may take a while, but hey, you got kids or grandkids or whatever, or you're young, right? 20, 30-year time horizon really is not too long to conceive of and think about. And so we need to be thinking long term when it gets to issues like that with regard to water. And so that's a big challenge, how we limit our water use, particularly from our groundwater sources, our aquifers, so that we make sure they're always there, right? And that they're always able to supply, some percentage of what we need when we need it. Because think about this, you got a drought. In a drought, what water supply takes the biggest hit? Is it surface water or groundwater? That's my question to you.
Oh, I mean, I would think groundwater because it gets used up and it's not being replenished.
You know what? That's partial credit. I'll give you partial credit because that is true. People will turn to groundwater during a drought, but in a big drought, you have less water in rivers and lakes, and those sources are becoming depleted, not just by our use, but Mother Nature, right? Evaporation, not as much rainfall. And what happens is what you just said, people turn to aquifers even more than they are now during those periods. And so, at any rate, it's more important in the future that we have multiple sources for our large cities. Dallas, really very, very focused on surface water, as is Austin, very focused on surface water. We're getting our water from Austin Water gets it from the Lower Colorado River Authority, which has the Highland Lakes, right? That's a surface water source on the Colorado River. You go to San Antonio, that's a groundwater city for the most part still. The Edwards Aquifer is the primary source of water for that city. And so, it's really important in the future that our large cities, you have multiple sources of different nature so that they can combine the best elements of each to respond to the current conditions.
Right. And what is Houston? You didn't mention, is Houston aquifer or groundwater?
So I didn't mention Houston because I'm not totally sure how much. Okay. But they have a large surface water supply. They used to have depend much more on groundwater, but that particular aquifer, when they pumped too much water out of it, they had serious land subsidence. And so now the aquifer, this Gulf Coast aquifer is what's called, that aquifer within Houston, Harris County, around Harris County, is now managed to limit land subsidence. So think about the Edwards Aquifer. You've probably seen, limestone caves and, that kind of aquifer. You can take water out of it. It's a unique aquifer, let me tell you, but it can be relatively quickly replenished by heavy rainfall. And when you pump out of that aquifer, the ground does not subside. If you look at California, I'm not picking on California. I love California, actually. But that drought in the Central Valley, when people had to turn to groundwater, you found 20, 30 feet or more of land subsidence, permanent subsidence, because some of these aquifers, when you take the water out, right, the soil and the strata compacts, and you can't reinflate it, and so you're done at that point. And so we have to be careful about that because there's still the possibility of some more of that here in Texas in certain places.
So I was going to say, okay, so here's I'm going to tag on to that. The people that are regulating our water, can they predict that? Like what happened in Houston, whenever they were pulling out too much water, did scientists and people like yourself know that was going to happen? And you're like, hey, but they're like, no, we're not going to pay attention. Or does it happen? And then you're like, oh my, we did not predict this.
So these days, we generally know it's going to happen. But in the case of Houston and subsidence, that was happening in the 50s and 60s. Okay. And they had some areas of not too large of an area, but they had one area where the land subsided by 10 feet. And so Houston is already low elevation, right?
Yep. Yeah.
That's pretty serious. And so the legislature, I think it was in the 50s and 60s, looked at that and said, okay, we need to regulate groundwater use there. We're not going to do it in the rest of the state. But this problem we can't have, right? Houston's going to, end up with a situation like New Orleans.
Right.
Or something maybe. And so, so in general, we do have models now that tell us what the impacts are likely to be. And the models are, this is what people say about models. All models are wrong. Some are useful. And what they mean by that is, a model is a mathematical representation of reality that it doesn't get it 100% right, but it might get it 99% right or 95% right. And that's very useful, right? And so, we do have a very sophisticated and advanced system in place in Texas for modeling what's going to happen with our groundwater. Texas is really kind of a leader in that, developing that. And so that's critical when these groups get together to plan and put together the water plan every 5 years. They're looking at the projections of what's going to happen if they use too much in this place or that place. And so one thing that you can say is that, we know pretty much what's going to happen in that regard. And so the question is, are we going to restrict our groundwater use to make sure that that doesn't come to pass? That's a tough one for these groundwater districts, right? Because the people who are using the groundwater are like, well, I don't really want to cut back that much. And so some of them, though, are, they're like, yeah, I would love to cut back enough to make sure that these springs, which are important to my community, keep on flowing. Mm-hmm. That's a Central Texas thing and South Texas thing right now, but hopefully for the rest of the state, we'll see that kind of an ethic evolve. Because, that's the indicator of the health of your water supply, right?
Right.
Absolutely. And I will say this, and I hope all of us proud Texans bind together. We're enjoying all of the good, so we've got to get prepared for what could go bad. I mean, that's what we have to do as a community, not just Central Texas versus West Texas. We need to be the state of Texas. And then as we bring in more Texans, come on, bring your brains. And, in my opinion, be willing to do without a lawn. Cactus is beautiful. My parents put in fake grass, AstroTurf or whatever, which is fantastic. You don't ever have to mow again. So we're all going to have to get in this boat and row together so we can keep getting all these businesses coming to Texas and we can keep booming.
Right. We can do it. I know we can. The state's got a can-do spirit. And with regard to water, I think people, they look at it differently, which is actually something that's universal. Anywhere you go on Earth, people look at water use and taking water and moving it out of their community to some other far distant community the same way. And so the solutions I'm working on are really oriented towards, hey, let's maximize the use of our water where we are now before we start to really go out and look and bringing it from East Texas or the coast or wherever. There's so much more we can do where we are here before you really want to pull the trigger on doing something like that.
Right.
Well, those are my questions, and I'll pick my top 3 of your podcast and post them.
Well, I always say the latest ones are pretty good, but there are definitely some in the past that I was really very fortunate to have those folks come on and talk to me. And that's kind of a takeaway from my podcast is I just been lucky. There's so many great guests who have given a little of their time to come discuss various water topics with me, and I'm just trying to make sure I don't mess it up too much. I mean, it's you can, if you listen to it, the older ones, my kids are coming in and saying, asking for something or that. I'm like, I'm recording this,
Yeah.
or the dog's barking or the phone's ringing or something. Yeah.
Well, that's how we feel about you. We are just thrilled that you would take 30 minutes out of your day and spend it with us and educate us. I know a lot more about water than I did. And I also believe I don't know. There's more I don't know. Now
You're getting there. You're getting
I'm
there.
aware of how much I don't know now. So, Diane, is there anything else you had?
So I would like to say this is my little golden question. That's if they're, the genie from the movie Aladdin, what are your 3 wishes that you would be granted, if you surrounding the water issues in Central Texas? If you had 3 wishes, what would they be? What would you like to be granted? I think
so
it's just,
I wrote these down because I had to think about this. I was like, I'm
I
not
can
sure.
guess one of them. I know what it is.
I bet you will. I'll do that. I'll do that one first. That people would learn to love drought tolerant native landscapes.
I like that.
That's first.
Mhm.
Then that ratepayers would be more understanding of the need of your local utility to increase rates over time. I mean, nobody likes to pay more, but if you look at what water utilities have done in terms of rates, most of them in the state of Texas have not really raised their rates that often. And, that's why we've got an infrastructure problem, right? Because it costs money to fix things and replace things. And so the last one it's a goofy one, that somehow we would discover this new untapped source of fresh water that is plentiful, and that ain't gonna happen. But
Yeah,
you're right.
I like
You said
that.
genie, so I was like,
Yes,
okay.
yeah, exactly. I think you take it to that level. Absolutely. I'm on board with the last one too. There was the magic, supply of water that kept it's like the youth water too. Keeps me young too. I'll take that.
Oh yeah, the fountain of youth. Yeah.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, that's not a bad idea.
I love it. Well, we appreciate you. Yes, we appreciate you, Todd, coming on and just allowing us to pick your brains on kind of this overall spectrum of the water, just really touching the surface of it. But I think there's so much, like DeLea and I both have learned in a short amount of time. I think this really is going to engage our audience to really start to look in, and obviously outreach to your podcast, the Water and Talk plus Water plus Talk, and research and look up, what we can do together in moving forward in a collaborative effort. And you've gave some great advice and great information with your experience. Now we can share this with our audience and grow hopefully this network.
Great, thanks. Yeah, Talk plus Water, Talk plus sign water.
Yes, I will add in. Do want to say thank you, Dr. Todd Votteler. And here's where I have that I can reach you. Social media. You're on LinkedIn, Facebook, as well as Twitter, and the handle is Water Disputes. SoundCloud and Apple Podcast is where your podcast can be found, and it is Talk plus Water. That's what I typed in instead of your name and was able to find it. You've got a website, waterdisputes.org, and email Votteler@waterdisputes.org. We will put all of that on our website, our social media, YouTube. Is there any other contact information you want us to include?
Oh, if you look at Twitter, at H2O Wonk is like my handle there. And so I tweet a lot, even though Twitter is it's a rough place these days. Let me tell you.
No,
tweeter.
It's not.
You're a tweeter too. I got to get on the tweeting more.
I'm a tweeter. So all of us commercial brokers across the United States, we have a hashtag retweet, RETWIT.
Yeah.
Todd, is there a hashtag that you water people like to use?
Yes.
So, in Texas, they keep changing it. It used to be at TX Water, and now nobody uses that anymore. And so I'm like, okay, I don't know why we don't use it anymore. But I sometimes see at Texas Water, one word. But what I would do is just go with at TX Water. And let's bring it back. Why not? It was good.
TX Water.
Bring it back. I'm going to retweet it today.
Make it great again. Yeah, or something, right?
Make it great again. Well, we don't want to upset it.
Okay.
And I will say, I'm going to let everybody know where you can find the Texas Triangle. We are on Twitter, the TX Triangle, Instagram, the TX Triangle Pod. We're on Facebook, the Texas Triangle Podcast, and YouTube. This is the first place this video goes, is YouTube. And I forgot to introduce us at the beginning. I am DeLea Becker of Beckwright Commercial, a broker and founder here in Central Texas. Diane Buhl is a broker as well here in Central Texas. And I want to say land developer.
Yes, land and natural resource with water resource leasing and mineral rights specialist. So I help and consult with certain leases, land and site selection for mixed use development projects.
Well, fantastic. So if you're concerned about your water issues and you're looking for land, call Diane.
Well, I would call, we're going to go to Todd first and see if it's a good thing before you go call me. Yeah.
This has been fun.
So much fun. We'll see you at the next Texas Triangle podcast.
Yes.
Thanks
fantastic.
so much.
Thanks, Todd, for joining us. And we'll talk to you later. Bye, y'all.
Anytime. Bye-bye.